A children's hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. These children, and thousands like them, are still paying the price of the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, the American military sprayed more than 70 million liters of the herbicide known as Agent Orange over Vietnam, over a period of 9 years. Invisibly, it contaminated the soil, the fields, the rivers, and the people, and still does. Agent Orange contains one of the most poisonous variants of dioxin. A glass of it added to the drinking water of a major city like Berlin could wipe out the entire population. The effects of this toxic defoliant have long since ceased to be headline news, like the people of Vietnam themselves. We're accompanying the Red Cross on a visit to central Vietnam. The Ton Ha family lives here in a small remote village. The Red Cross estimates that there are 150,000 children in the province suffering from the after effects of Agent Orange. The sounds of a computer game as we enter the house. Hang is 16 years old. Born with disabilities, she's hardly ever been outside the family home. During the visit of the Red Cross workers, Hang suffers a severe epileptic attack. She needs extensive medical care, but the parents don't have the money. Hang's 11-year-old sister, Lim, also suffers from disabilities.
We are convinced that thousands of people are affected, both physically and mentally. They are victims of Agent Orange. In the name of peace, humanity, and friendship, we expect help in our plight.
Every day, the children's father visits the graveyard right behind his house. 12 of his children are buried here. They all died shortly after being born. He can't even afford proper graves. The United States government spends millions of dollars tracing American soldiers buried in Vietnam to bring their remains back home for burial. These graves are simply numbered.
It's a crime committed by the USA. I have no healthy children. The Americans sprayed chemicals on our country, and we were affected because we lived in this region and defended our country. When I returned from the war, my relatives and neighbors were very worried about what happened to us, but no one could help.
In 1965, the United States intervened in the civil war between North and South Vietnam as an ally of the Western-oriented South. To flush the Viet Cong forces of the North out of the jungle, the USA used the defoliant Agent Orange.
The US military mainly sprayed in South Vietnam. While I was fighting in the war, I was told to cover my face with a wet cloth to protect against the chemicals. When they sprayed the forests, my eyes watered, and I knew it was a chemical that was doing it. Sometimes there was no water to wet the cloth.
So I peed on the cloth. That's how we survived.
The deformities of the two surviving daughters have presumably been passed on genetically by the father because of the toxins in his body. The girls are at home all the time. Hang was in Hanoi once for an operation. They tried a neurological intervention in the brain to stop her epileptic attacks, but without success.
Chắc là có rồi. Vì đang đi học mà.
I'd really like to go to school with other children. I have no friends here. If there was just a school for children who are sick like me, that would be great. I'd go there like a shot.
Có một lớp nào mà dạy những người như cháu đây thì cũng tốt.
Hang's father tells us that his daughter often suffers from depression. She's often bored and afraid that she's going to die soon. For years, the Vietnamese government did not allow victims of Agent Orange to be filmed outside the cities. Now, though, it wants the world to see the devastating consequences of the contamination of the country. The Red Cross tells us about children with an extremely rare form of birth defect. This family lives a very secluded life. The two brothers, aged 15 and 17, can only move on all fours. Their sister and another brother have the same disability. The Red Cross doctors suspect the cause is a genetic defect brought about by Agent Orange. All four children are also mentally handicapped. The parents look after them on their own. There's no school for them, no hospital. The mother works in the family rice paddy. The father takes care of the children.
Like every father, I wanted my children to grow up healthy. But sadly, I didn't know I was contaminated with this poisonous chemical. I expect those responsible to do something for us. I won't live forever. And then, who'll take care of my children?
The fan hasn't worked for ages. The house is hot and oppressive. The warmth and openness of the children is very moving. The father is a Buddhist. People in this region of Vietnam used to believe that a handicapped child was a punishment for the bad lives of the forebears, but they've long since stopped thinking that. The father too knows that it's the toxins in his body and the contaminated land that are to blame. He's a victim of the dioxin that is spread through the food chain. Two of the brothers can manage to stand, but only with support and for a short time. All four children inherited their genetic defect from their father. But he wasn't in the jungle during the war, and he wasn't sprayed with Agent Orange.
We had nothing to eat at the end of the war, so I searched what had been the war zone for anything the Americans had left behind. I was often in the jungle for days, and I also drank from the river. I didn't know the whole area was contaminated. I just wanted to collect scrap from the war to sell.
The after effects of Agent Orange are also to be found in areas that were never sprayed, like here in the north of Vietnam, in the province of Tay Binh. The reason? Many men and women fought in the south, in the sprayed region. They came back with toxins in their bodies. Now the people here are fighting on a different front. Nguyen Van Ky, a former soldier, wants justice for his children and is prepared to go all the way to America for it. In March 2004, together with other Vietnamese, he filed a claim in a federal court in New York for compensation from the chemical companies which produced Agent Orange.
We are filing charges against the American chemical companies because our victims of Agent Orange lead a dreadful life. Who will look after my children when I'm dead? Both are disabled. I have enormous problems and just can't carry on like this. The war ended 30 years ago, but in my family it's still going on.
In Tay Binh province, former soldiers have set up the Vietnamese Association for Victims of Agent Orange. The aim is to provide material, medical and legal support for the victims. In addition, they're claiming compensation from the American companies. The founding members are discussing whether they need more victim cases for their new class action lawsuit in New York. Mr. Ha represented the victims at the first hearing in America. At the time, he was still hoping for justice. But in March 2005, the first compensation suit was dismissed by a New York court on the grounds that a causal link between Agent Orange and disabilities could not be proved. At the same time, the chemical companies had paid $180 million compensation in an out-of-court settlement to US soldiers who had come into contact with Agent Orange. The Vietnamese didn't get a cent.
We are determined to carry on through the courts until we get justice. We believe we can win. The American chemical concerns, which have illegally profited from the suffering of millions of people, must accept responsibility and pay damages.
The legal setback in New York was a bitter blow for the association. The local mayor has come to urge the association to fight the chemical giants harder than ever. Justice will always triumph in the end, she says. One affected family receives a present. Their home has been redecorated for them. A former colonel suggests recruiting new members for the association. It's striking that many families have more than one child with serious disabilities. That's the case with Mr. Ha's family. His 4 sons are deaf-mute. They also had a sister.
My daughter Hoti died of cancer when she was 5. She was a very pretty baby when she was born. She was so beautiful, like all newborn girls. But she couldn't open her eyes. She had an operation on her eyes, and then she could see, but she was deaf-mute like her brothers.
Why is it that there are so many victims of the chemical deployment even today? The US Army suspected the Vietnamese enemy was in the jungle and began to systematically strip the jungle of its foliage with chemicals. The justification was that this would save the lives of thousands of American soldiers. The defoliant used was called Agent Orange because it was stored in drums with orange stripes on them.
Và đi vào chiến đấu ở phía Nam, ở phía Bắc Công Tum.
I was on dangerous missions in South Vietnam. I drove the truck at night and hid it during the day when I slept. We drank water from springs and ate fruit from the jungle. I knew nothing about Agent Orange, but I did notice the trees losing their leaves. I drove these missions for many years. Later I learned that the Americans had been spraying poisonous chemicals.
Mr. Ha does a lot of travelling, looking after the affected families. In rural areas in particular, many feel completely abandoned. It's always the same situation. The parents have too much to cope with. They're desperate and the children suffer. It's a poor country and medical provision is woefully inadequate. Another father is waiting for Mr. Ha. He's at his wit's end.